Everything we've translated so far have been about particular named things. Maisie, New York, Mount Everest. But what happens when I say, somebody hit a home run, and I don't know or don't care who? How do you put a sentence with no name in it into a logic that's built entirely out of names? Let's consider. Hello philosophers, I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Channel Introduction to Predicate Logic course. Last time we broke atomic propositions into the parts name and predicate. Today we'll hit a wall with those tools and we'll have to climb over it. What happens when Papa Bear says, someone ate my porridge? We're going to add the machinery to be able to take care of that, quantifiers and variables. This is the heart of predicate logic, and it's what Frege was looking for back in 1879. Someone ate my porridge. Now we know that Goldilocks ate it. Is Papa Bear then saying Goldilocks ate my porridge? No, and the reason why is the whole lesson. If Papa Bear had said, Goldilocks ate my porridge, then that statement would be true if Goldilocks ate it, but false if she didn't. Now, if he said someone ate my porridge, that statement is true whether it was Goldilocks or somebody else. So the word someone here is not a singular term. It doesn't lock on to one particular individual that has to have the property. Same with a man came to the door. That's true if that man was Bob Wood, but it's also true if that was Bill Smith. So what does the word someone do? Well, consider the statement, someone enjoys running. For that to be true, we don't need any particular person to enjoy running. We just need at least one person. So the job of the word someone is to say how many, namely at least one. That makes it a quantifier. Now, in the last video, we talked about Frege and his 1879 work, the Begriffsschrift. Before Frege, the words all and some were handled clumsily by Aristotle's term logic, namely propositions like everybody loves somebody. Aristotle's logic could handle all A's or B's, but not all A's are some B's. Frege's move is to treat the words some and all as devices that bind a variable, ranging over a whole domain. And that's where mathematics and programming get their for all, or there exists. Let's move on to talk about existential quantifiers. Someone enjoys running. That means that at least one person enjoys running. It's saying that something out there exists, and that thing enjoys running. Now, some other words that will flag the existential quantifier are some, like some dogs have fleas, at least one adult must be present, someone's been using my toothbrush, there is a, as in there is an elephant in the garden. And you can see we symbolize this with the backwards E. Then we have the universal quantifier that stands for all. Everyone is eating porridge. The words that you would see here would be words like all, every, each and every, everything, everyone, everybody. And as you can see, we represent this with the upside down A. And here's how we would symbolize this. Everything is green, we would rephrase. Everything is such that it is green. Now the words thing and it are doing a special job. They're placeholders that refer to the same thing. In MPL, we will use a variable to symbolize this. So this is where those 6 letters that we reserved in the last video come into play. The lowercase u, v, w, x, y, z. So we replace those words thing and it with an x. Every x is such that x is green. And now we can symbolize green with a capital G. So every x is such that gx. And finally, we can use our quantifier. For all x, gx. Same plan goes for something is green. Something is such that it is green. Some x is such that gx. Then we put the quantifier, the backwards e in there. Backwards ex, gx. And by the way, in other books, especially older books, you'll see different symbols for the all and the sum. If you're interested in what those might be, Smith goes over them in the book. But yeah, don't get thrown if you go to a different logic textbook and not sure what's going on. Now let's look at some examples. Something is both red and green. For some x, rx and gx. Everything is either red or green. For all x, rx or gx. All red things are heavy. For all x, if rx then hx. Some red things are heavy. For some x, Rx and Hx. Now look at those bottom two. We'll see here that there are actually 2 golden rules that we want to follow when we're dealing with the alls and the sums. The first rule is that all always pairs with the arrow. So we got for all x, if Rx then Hx. Not for all x, Rx and Hx. That would mean something more like for anything that you choose, for all things, they are both red and heavy, and that obviously doesn't make a lot of sense. Rule 2, The sum pairs with the and. That's why we got for some x, rx, and hx. And then we have this sneaky trap at the bottom. If something is red, then it is heavy. Now that does have the word something in here, but this is actually a universal claim. You're really saying that for all things, if it is red, then it is heavy. So that something there is kind of tricking us. So you definitely have to be on the lookout for the word something. Make sure that it's not making a universal claim. Here are some more examples. Something is red but not heavy. For some x, rx and not hx. Nothing is red. It's not the case that for some x, rx. Or equivalently, for all x, it's not the case that rx. Notice those are the same things, only the not is either outside of the quantifier or inside of the quantifier. And that changed the sum to the all. Then something isn't red. For some x, not rx. Or it's not the case that for all x, rx. Something is red and something is heavy. For some x, rx. And for some x, hx. Now, notice the difference between that and for some x, both rx and hx. That would say that there is something that is both red and heavy. But what we just said is that there is something that is red and there's something that is heavy, and they don't have to be the same thing necessarily. Now, so far, we've used that all x to range over everything. But what if we want to range over just persons or some group instead of every single thing? So if we said every person is special, if we wanted to say for all x, sx, that would not say for every person is special. That would say for everything is special. That's not what we want to say. We want to say just every person. The way we do that is to make persons into a predicate. For all x, if px, then sx. For everything that exists, if it's a person, then it's special. And then some people are special. For some x, it is both a px and an sx. It is both a person and special. And notice how our arrow goes with the all, the and goes with the sum. Now here's a genuinely deep bit. When a tour guide says that everybody is ready, do they mean every single person in the entire world is ready? No, they mean just everybody on the tour is ready. So how do we deal with that? Well, there are two schools of thought here. The semantic approach is this. The guide is literally expressing this. For all x, if px and tx, then rx. In other words, for all things, if it is a person and it's on the tour, then it is ready. And that seems to work. But there's also the pragmatic approach, and that's the one that the book takes. And that says that the tour guide is actually saying for all x, if px, then rx. In other words, for all things, if it's a person, then it's ready. But the rules of conversational implicature that were discovered by Paul Grice indicate that when it's said, we should interpret it to mean only persons that are on the tour. Otherwise, this would violate what Paul Grice called the maximum of quality, which says that every contribution to a conversation should be one that you believe to be true. So we hear the tour guide say that every person is ready, and we think, well, they can't mean every single person, so they must mean just every person on the tour. Now, what this does for us is keep the translation simple. And that's the way we like it in logic. So the rule of thumb that falls out from this is the following. Only add a restricting predicate when the English actually contains a word for it. Remember, the restricting predicate is the one that narrows down that for all x from being about all things to a particular group. So in this case, people that are on the tour or just on the tour. That on the tour is not in the original English, so we don't put it in the logic. Let's look at some more phrases that trip people up. First, the word only. If I wanted to say that all horses gallop, okay, that's easy. For all x, if hx, then gx. But what if I want to say only horses gallop? Now, that would not be the same thing. That is more like the opposite, or I should say the reverse. If it's a galloping thing, then it's a horse. So when you have that word only, you actually flip the arrow. You would say for all x, if gx, then hx. You can actually combine those two, all horses gallop and only horses gallop. You can combine it to all and only horses gallop, and that would be for all x, hx, if and only if gx. Now let's look at necessary and sufficient conditions. If P is a sufficient condition for Q, then that means that P is enough to bring about Q. So if you got P, then you're going to get Q. Whereas a necessary condition, if P is necessary for Q, that actually means the opposite. That means that the only way you can get Q is if you have P, so that if you have Q, then you must have had P. So P is sufficient for Q is an if P then Q. P is necessary for Q is the opposite. if Q then P. And then of course, you can combine those to necessary and sufficient conditions, P if and only if Q. All right, 8.3.2 exercises. Here's the glossary. Again, you can take a screenshot of this or you can just keep your book open to this page. If independence Hall is red, then something is red. If Ri, then for some x, Rx. If everything is red, then independence Hall is red. If for all x, Rx, then Ri. Notice the all x is not outside of the parentheses. Nothing is both green and red. It's not the case that for some x, it is both gx and rx. It's not true that nothing is both green and red. It's not the case that for some x, gx and rx. You can actually get rid of those two negative signs if you want to. Red things aren't green things. For all x, if rx, then not gx. All red things are heavy or expensive. For all x, if rx, then hx or ex. All red things that are not heavy are expensive. For all x, if rx and not hx, then ex. All red things are heavy, but some green things are not. For all x, if rx, then hx. And for some x, gx and not hx. All red things are heavy, but not all heavy things are red. For all x, if rx, then hx. And it's not the case that for all x, if hx, then rx. Some red things are heavy, and furthermore, some green things are heavy too. For some x, rx, and hx, and for some x, gx, and hx. Some red things are not heavy, and some heavy things are not red. For some x, rx, and not hx, and for some x, hx, and not rx. If Kermit is green and red, then it's not true that nothing is both green and red. If gk and rk, then it's not the case that there is some x that both gx and rx. Oscar's piano is heavy, but it's neither red nor expensive. HO and not RO and not EO. If Spondylix is heavy, and by the way, Spondylix apparently is some heavy golden nugget that was discovered in the 1800s. Who knows? If Spondylix is heavy and expensive, and all expensive things are red, and all heavy things are green, then Spondylix is red and green. This one is brutal. If it's the case that HS and ES, and it's the case that for all X, if EX then RX, and for all X, if HX then GX, then RS and GS. If Kermit is heavy, then something is green and heavy. If HK, then for some X, GX and HX. If everything is fun, then nothing is worthwhile. If for all X, FX, then it's not the case that for some X, WX. Some things are fun and some things are worthwhile, but nothing is both. For some x fx and for some x wx, and then remember that word but is another word for and. So and, it's not the case that for some x, both fx and wx. Nothing is probable unless something is certain. There we have that word unless. So if it's not the case that for some x, cx, then it's not the case that for some x, px. Some things are probable and some aren't, but nothing is certain. For some x, px, and for some x, not px, and it's not the case that for some x, cx. If something is certain, then it is probable. For all x, if cx, then px. All right, let's keep it up. 8.3.5 exercises. This time we're working with person-restricted sets. Again, you can take a screenshot of this glossary or just keep your book open to this page. Everyone is happy. For all x, if px, then hx. In other words, for everything, if it's a person, then it's happy. Someone is sad. For some x, both px and sx. No one is both happy and sad. It's not the case that for some x, both px and hx and sx. If someone is sad, then not everyone is happy. If for some x, px and sx, then it's not the case that for all x, if px, then hx. No one who isn't happy is laughing. For all x, if px and not hx, then not lx. If Gary's laughing, then someone is happy. If LG, then for some x, both px and hx. Whoever is laughing is happy. For all x, if px and lx, then hx, everyone is laughing if Gary is. If LG, then for all x, if px, then lx. Someone is sad, but not everyone, and not Gary. For some x, px, and sx. And it's not the case that for all x, if px, then sx. And it's not the case that sg. Gary isn't happy unless everyone is sad. There's that word unless. If it's not the case that for all x, if px, then sx, then not hg. All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray. A little mamas and papas for you. It is both the case that for all x, if fx, then bx, and gk. Some but not all leaves are brown. For some x, fx and bx, and it's not the case that for all x, if fx, then bx. Only leaves are brown. There's that word only. So that flips the arrow. For all x, if bx, then fx. Only brown leaves can stay. For all x, if cx, then bx and fx. Everyone is in trouble unless Gary is happy. If not hg, then for all x, if px, then ox. Everyone who works at this company is in trouble unless Gary is happy. If not hg, then for all x, if px and wx, then ox. If Stephanie's telling the truth, then someone is lying. If tn, then for some x, px and yx. If no one is lying, then Stephanie's telling the truth. If it's not the case that for some x, px and yx, then tn. Either Stephanie's lying or no one's telling the truth and everyone's in trouble. Either yn or it's not the case that for some x, px and tx, and for all x, if px, then ox. And if Gary is lying, then not everyone in this room is telling the truth. If yg, then it's not the case that for all x, if px and nx, then tx. And that's it. We can now say some and every. We can restrict quantifiers to persons or groups. We can handle only, unless, necessary sufficient conditions. We basically have the full expressive power of monadic predicate logic. What we haven't done yet, though, is make it precise. We've been translating by feel. Next time, in section 8.4, we'll nail down the syntax. Exactly which strings of symbols are well-formed formulas. What is a quantifier's scope? And what's the crucial difference between a free and a bound variable? It'll be the grammar that makes everything we've done rigorous. So subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can stay tuned for 8.4. Don't forget to like and comment, and I'll see you in 8.4. Adios.